All right, Brad Skiles. I'm here with Gary Eppenbaugh, and I'm looking forward to this interview, Gary. Um, you are not just out of the limelight, you purposefully hide, it seems, in the process of what really happens. So let's let people get to know you first before we get too far into this. Here's what I've been wanting to start with. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being extremely passionate, knowledgeable, etc., how do you rank yourself in terms of your interest and knowledge of politics?
Oh, it's definitely a 10. And it's
Yeah.
perfect. Just came about I was one of those that, like everybody else, something's wrong. You know, Washington's lost its way. And it's like, who is out there that truly understands what's going on and how to fix it? And that's really where I started really following Ron Paul.
So what age were you when you kind of figured out that you have an interest in politics that most people don't have?
Oh, it was after I left college. I got my degree in history, minor political science, with a desire to teach. And whether that happens or not, at this point, what happens happens. I'm comfortable with how things are in my life now, to where, if I don't teach, in a school environment, I'm okay with it. But a lot of it is just that, I I consider myself, I have a job that pays my bills. But I don't consider that my job. My job is what I actually do now, is working with Kurt and now John in advancing the liberty movement in Indiana and hopefully nationwide.
So how much time do you think that takes for you?
Oh, that varies. During session, that's a full-time job in itself.
Wow.
It's one of those, it really kind of evolved over time. It started out with, because after a while I realized that Kurt was alone, right, in the chamber. And he, it was one of those that he needed to be prepared for what was going to be happening. So it was just, an email, and it could be brief, it could be long, depending on the calendar. It's like, hey, here's what's coming up. Here's some good things, here's some bad things. Do with it what you will. But then out of session, it's really different, because there's, news doesn't stop. Things happen all the time. And it's just something to look at, to where it could be something that might be useful next session. It could be something that could be a topic for either a bill or an amendment, or something that, he may not want to, Kurt or John may not necessarily lead on, but they could potentially push other representatives towards it. It's like, hey, I heard, about this, up in your neck of the woods, are you planning on doing anything with it? It's kind of like being the eyes and ears of what's going on in the state. And that kind of, what I see happening in other parts of the state kind of gives me a guideline or an indication of what may happen. And it doesn't happen all the time, but it's something that I find useful.
Okay. So I want to get back to my first question. You're a 10 in terms of your interest and understanding of politics. I see you as a 10 in terms of understanding how to read bills and think through the legislative process. That's, from my understanding, how you have been very helpful to Kurt, is actually reading bills, staying on top of things. You have an interest and an ability that exceeds most people. My question is, give us one or two areas where you think you're weak, in terms of, help us just get to know you. If you're kind of I'm going to say this lovingly, if you're kind of a political nerd, help us understand the other aspects of you. What would you consider to be maybe a couple of weaknesses that you might have where you're weak?
That's a good question. Oh, that's actually a good question. I'd probably say one of the things that I'm good weakest at is trying to go for the home run. I mean, use a baseball term here. But if you don't, home runs are great, but if just getting on base is helpful, then that's, something that, and I think this session past has, understand that weakness, but it's also helped me understand how I can turn that around and use that. Because a lot of, one of the things, that we've talked about for years is protection of conception. That's great. I mean, that's the home run. But with the Baby River language that got in, thankfully, that's a good hit. That's a solid hit. That's something that we can be proud of, and, we can use that our next turn.
Okay, so this is why I wanted to interview you partially. You fit in extremely well to the cause of liberty. So I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and you're the kind of guy I would want to have if we could design it. Obviously, we don't. I think God really put all this together. But Kurt cannot do what he does without you. Would you agree?
It would be harder for me.
Yeah.
If I wasn't, I think because there are other people that give him good advice, and I don't go out and try to proclaim myself or portray myself as a gatekeeper. I want Kurt to be given as much knowledge, and Kurt and also John, as much knowledge as possible. My goal is to make sure that they are the two most prepared legislators in the chamber, because most of them probably will just take what they're told and go with it. Mm-hmm. But it takes keen eyes to see, is what they're really saying what's really happening. And probably the biggest one that I would point out as a fallacy is the road funding. Where they talked about raising the gas tax a couple years ago. That was horrible, and they're saying that all of this is going to roads. I've had arguments with legislators telling me, it's like, that doesn't say that, it doesn't say that, where do you find this? And I point out, it's like, it's right in the bill. It's like, I send them a link, I was like, here's where it starts, and they never get back to me. So they either know I'm right, they don't want to admit it, or they just, try to portray me as somebody that doesn't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so what I want our viewers of the prayer page to understand is that much like 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we each have a role. So there's going to be some people that are extremely effective in being able to pray. It's almost a giftedness. There's other people who are excellent with people skills and speaking, and they're the person who can attract other people to them. And I don't know, I was super impressed last year with the 15, 16-year-old that took maybe less than 10 minutes to create that one meme we have of Kurt and John in the Batmobile. That was something I had no ability to do. I gave him the idea, all of a sudden he produced it. It's like, oh my word, can't believe he could do that on his phone. But what your role is like you said, I was expecting you to almost say it this way. Your calling, it seems to me, is to be this support person to, right now, it's just two people, but to Kurt and John, and you're providing a level of information that I don't know how it would happen if it wasn't for you.
And it's different because, Kurt and John have, LA's legislative assistants. They ask that, press people, but those ones down there in Indianapolis, will work with 2, 3, 4, or however many more representatives. Right. I don't have that problem. I work with just 2.
Yeah.
And it's easier to balance it, but it's also something that I also know that I don't shoulder. I mean, there are other people that give do a lot more stuff with John than I do. I mean,
Yeah.
one of those that if John needs something done with a quicker turnaround, then I provide it. And with Kurt, it's more the opposite. I do a lot of the bulk work with Kurt because I've worked with him longer, and it's just become more established is kind of like the word I'm looking for, because this is on my 6th session, and John has just been with this first one. So, and John's team has been amazing with keeping up a lot of his social media pages, and it's just been amazing how well this session unfolded.
Yeah. So again, what I'm trying to get everyone to understand is we see John, we see Kurt, and we think that it's all about them, but it's not. There's so many other people in the background that enable this whole thing to happen. So let's talk about this, Gary. I think you'd have a perspective of this. For any other rep that we might pick, their legislative assistant at the State House is paid by the speaker. The speaker is his or her employer. And that's the person that's trying to give advice for the rep about what to do or the PR area.
Yeah, I don't even think they do that. I think a lot of it, most of the time, what I hear that they do is they'll communicate amongst themselves on behalf of the representatives. They'll be like, they'll send out an email to for example, I'll say Kurt, because Kurt's LA will send out an email to all the other LAs that the LAs can send forward to the representatives that they work for. It's like, hey, Kurt's sponsoring this resolution, is authoring it. If you're he's putting it out there. If you're interested, let us know. That's what I think a lot of what they do. They don't do a lot of, they may occasionally do some research on a specific thing or follow with an agency, but they don't do anywhere near the work that I do.
Yeah, right.
They don't go through, it's like, here's what's coming down the calendar, here's what's in it, here, they don't do that.
Yeah.
That's what I do. So I do a service that's different from what the indie LAs do.
Right. So you had a trip a couple weeks ago where you went to Indianapolis. Is there anything you can tell us about that? Like what you did when you were there? You were connecting with Kurt and John.
A lot of it was just basically to be down there, to be that quicker reference. I mean, I can be effective. I can be a reference, up here. I'm 110 miles from Indy, but just to be there and to, go through a normal day with them, and to make sure that they're, fully prepared for what they're doing, and just to encourage them. Is really what I did. All in all, I think it was very successful.
Yeah. Okay, so let's pick a topic. As I've been interviewing people, we haven't really hit on constitutional carry. Could you kind of tell us your perspective without really naming maybe names, but tell us your perspective of how that developed this year? And I don't know, I don't want to set it up. So you tell us what happened.
All right. Well, there were several. I think there might have been 5 different bills that were all related to constitutional carry. John Jacob wrote one, had one, and there was a few others. But I knew the one that they were going to run with was going to be the one that was written by the chairman of Public Policy Committee, because he decides what bills are listened to. So we knew that's what that they were going to work with. And reading that bill, it's like, this is the best they could have done. And so I went through and I watched Public Policy Committee when they discussed this bill. And all these people, were coming up for it, against it. They were giving their arguments. It passed committee. It passed the House. Kurt and John tried to amend it to take out some language that, talking about a database. And it's like the author said it was a database. Many of the people who were against it said it was a database. All the people said it was a database, even though there were some people like there was no mention of a database. Watch the video. Go back and watch Public Policy Committee discuss this bill. Every one of the key players says that there's a database, even though and they're trying to come out and say that it doesn't, that it's not there. So it goes, and we're going through in the Senate and just waiting. Got a good sponsor, and we've got a chance to actually fix fix this. And a couple of senators decided that they're not going to hear it, and a couple of one of the representatives, who I won't name, but I can tell you he hates me, is starting to go after some of the more pro-gun rights groups. I mean, it's hard to believe that there are gun rights groups that many consider too pro-gun. And I've asked all of them nicely. It's like, if you have such a problem with these groups, why are you waiting until the bill is dead to criticize them? You could have criticized them when they talked to Public Policy Committee. You could have talked about them, after it was over. You could have went on Facebook. You could have run this long rant, about how they were trying to kill the bill. And they didn't do it. So it's one of those that really should have been a slam dunk. But to me, it looks like they were trying to do something just to tell their constituents that they tried it. I definitely don't think the author was behind it. But actually, I don't think any of the ones that even were, that had their names on it were in for it. I think they were just going out to try to say that they did something, and they were trying to blame it on the Sun.
Oh, okay. So with your insight, part of what you're saying is it that sometimes people get their names on these bills so that they can, I don't know, do better in the next election, or have something that they can shine against the people who are criticizing them, and they say, no, look, hey, I'm a good guy, this is what I did, even though they hoped it would never pass? I mean, am I seeing that right?
Yeah, and the best example I can give you is the resolutions that Kurt and John wrote to end the governor's state of emergency. 4 of them. And at most, there was maybe 1 or 2 other representatives who would sign on to that bill. And they weren't doing it to try to score political points. They did it because they actually believed it. But then another representative comes out with one, and half the caucus signs it. Mm-hmm. So, and it's like, you were for it, but the only reason that's stopping you from doing it is because you don't like the authors of it. And that's honestly their biggest problem. Is they're looking at them from my perspective, and I'm talking the Republican caucus here. They do the things that they do because they don't like Kurt and John. And in the long run, that's going to come back. And I personally think in the long run, that's going to come back and bite them. Because Kurt and John have stood on principle. And it's just one of the things that they haven't realized. I told a couple of people, it's like, we've won this session. You could look at everything, you could just glance over everything. It's like, well, Republicans didn't do too bad. They passed a balanced budget, they got this, they got that. But you have to look really close and really in depth to realize that establishment Republicans lost. Because there are some votes out there, and we don't. We could literally turn this into a 2-hour interview, so I'm not going to do it now. About how much the indie establishment screwed up.
Okay. Yeah, I know you're working on something. I'm working on something. We're going to communicate that hopefully in some kind of a simple way in the future. But what can you say about the budget when you had 98 people, I don't know, 98, 97 voting for the budget, and only, I guess it'd be 98, and only Kurt and John voted against it? What's your insight into what the budget was all about?
Okay, the fact that you get that overwhelming of a vote for a budget should be a red flag for Republicans, especially those who consider themselves conservative Republicans, those who consider themselves liberty Republicans, those who consider themselves, small government, fiscally conservative. This is not a fiscally conservative budget. This budget is greater than 3% spending over last time. Over the last budget. This bill raises taxes on electronic cigarettes. Now, a lot of people are like, well, okay, I don't pay that, so it doesn't affect me. That doesn't matter. It's a tax. They mysteriously found this, $2 billion in additional revenue. What could they have done with that? They could have, scaled back the gas tax. They could have given property tax relief. They could have, all these other things that they could have done, but they didn't. They spent like $600 million on, what I consider cronyism, regional development. And, if you see anything related to like regional development, that's cronyism. That's, all these other people trying to fight over this money when it's actually our money. But of course, a lot of people were like, well, we invested $1.9 billion in education. That's great. But, you could have still done that and, cut taxes, given relief to Hoosiers that really deserve it, that really need it in times like this. But they didn't. I don't know how, and there was a total of like maybe 5 votes, 5 no votes in the entire General Assembly. 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats. And the fact that that they basically is a bipartisan budget, even though a lot of the work was done by 2 Republicans. It seemed like establishment won on both parties.
Okay, so when I was reading an article about the budget, it said that there was $3 billion from COVID coming from the federal government. Mm-hmm. Am I right in thinking that the governor is extending now the 14th emergency? Is there some connection to all of that with getting money from the federal government?
Yes. It seems like Washington, in its infinite wisdom, has put in rules that saying that we're only going to offer this money, only if you continue a state of emergency. That's the only thing that we care about, is you have an emergency declaration that you need this. Now, we could go into specifics on whether or not, this is an emergency. I don't know. But there's just been overreach by the governor this entire time. When Kurt had his letter sent to the governor the day that he issued, his first, stay-at-home order, the 2 weeks to stop the spread, the timing of that letter was not coincidental. That was planned. Our plan was, he announces it, and then we announce our letter. And we basically, it's like, we think you're going down a dangerous road. It's like, do you really want to do this? And we gave him a constitutional out. It's like, here's how you do this. You say you swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. Here's how you do it. Are you willing to do that? And it's obvious that he didn't. And it seems like there's this game of chicken going on between the General Assembly, and the governors, but I don't see them see it. It seems to me like a lot of this is just this faint attempt at doing something to say that they did something. The governor could come on tomorrow and say that, nope, cases are too high. We've got to lock everything down. The General Assembly will not stop it. I don't. And if they would actually do that, I would be surprised, because the legislation that they passed to give themselves that power isn't strong enough. There is no teeth into it.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on. What do you think the next steps are for the liberty movement? As you look at this session and you're pretty excited about the successes, what do you think needs to happen next?
Well, the first one I've already mentioned is realize that we won. We won the session, hands down. Again, if somebody were to reach out to me and ask, give examples, I'd gladly do that. But this is an example where the liberty movement won. Legislators are going to figure out that, the movement is swinging our way, and they can either do one of two choices: join or clean out your desk next spring. Because there are going to be people that will run, and they've got knowledge, and that they will come after you, and they will hit hard. Even though, like I said, in the long run, it doesn't look like we won. On its face, we did. We got good actual pro-life legislation signed. We stayed true to our principles, even though the establishment might be mocking us for some of the things that we've done. In the long run, we'll come out ahead and we'll win. But that being said, there needs to be a halt in people trying to claim a mantle of leadership in the movement. And that's really kind of what derailed the Tea Party in 2008, 10, 12, 14. Because there was someone that was either trying to take the mantle, that were clearly establishment, or they were just looking out for themselves. Now, the Tea Party movement, you can say what you want, it was started by Ron Paul. Now, there'll be a bunch of people that will tell me it's like, well, people like Ron Paul and Ted Cruz and Rick Santorum. No. Deep down, look with conviction, it's Ron Paul. He was the face, but he was never, he never wanted to be the leader. He just wanted to be the guy that told people how and let people take it on their own. And I'm deal with several different liberty groups, and I use that in quotes, not trying to, say that they're not liberty movement, but I see some of those to where they just, there are leaders of those groups, but they shouldn't try to jockey to try to mold everybody under their banner. There might be some issues that get some people more passionate than others, and that's fine. And if there are people that have problems with other people in the quote unquote liberty movement, then they just need to back away. It's like, what? We can't hang out, we can't break bread, we just can't hang out together. And it's like, do your thing, I'll do ours, and hopefully in the end we win. I've seen it. I've seen personality, I've seen conflict between different people who want the same thing, but they want to try and do it their way. There is no one leader of the liberty movement. There might be several people that represent it. Kurt and John are champions of liberty, but I wouldn't necessarily consider them the heads of the liberty movement, because that's not the actual goal. The goal is to actually inspire a mass of people, through information, through seeing other people, and just trying to lead people that way.
Okay, so we just have a few more questions. You are so deep into this and you're working with both of them. How could you describe to us how Kurt and John work together? What are their strengths that complement each other. I don't picture both of these guys as being the same. So how would you describe their differences that make them work well together?
They're not. They're clearly not. And I think their biggest difference is their style. And watch, and how you notice this is watch Kurt give a speech and watch John give a speech. Kurt, yeah, even if he's going up knowing full well he's going to lose a vote, he's positive, he's upbeat, he's cheery, he's going up there thinking he's going to, projecting the idea that he's going to win, even though deep down he knows he's going to lose, because that's how the establishment is. John is different. John is one of those that he'll come out and he'll tell you exactly what's on his mind. How and how he feel and how he delivers it is so different. It's clearly with a passion, that what he truly believes in, that he was gonna, Kurt's trying to lift them up. John tries to make them look deep down. And my guess is probably a lot of what he says has stirred some of those people. There were probably quite a few stomach ulcers that a John Jacobs speech gave some of those people. They won't admit it, but deep down they know it's true.
Yeah, my impression is that I don't think you or I or even Kurt could have picked the candidate on a blank piece of paper and put together the characteristics that John fulfilled. In other words, it's such a good compliment, but it's not something that was really planned. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I agree. And it's one of those where I was, see, I also followed the session during work. And I'm one of those, I'm listening, and I'm trying to do my job, and I'm listening. And when I hear them go, Representative Jacob, I'm like, where's he going with this? Because I probably say I drafted probably 3 or 4 things that he actually read. Unlike Kurt, which was probably 6 or 7. And it's like, well, it's like, okay, where's he going with this? Because I don't know. Because if I don't know what he's, I don't know what he's going to do. If I don't prepare what he says, but then by the end of it, I'm like, all right, that wasn't bad. That's like, that was something that was good, that needed to be said. It was poignant. It was straight to the point. And what was brilliant is there was one where John was talking about, oh God, I honestly forget what it was. And the speaker was telling him, it's like, hey, speak to the bill. And John turned around, looked at him, and was like, I am. And kept right on going. Didn't even stop. I thought that was brilliant. Because, this is this guy who's basically been in office, 3 months. Basically telling the speaker that I'm not going to back down from, what I'm saying. And to be fair, John was speaking about the bill. The speaker was just mad about what he was saying. There was just too much truth for them to actually bear.
Okay, so this is kind of a weird question. Speak to the person that thinks that politics is somehow separate from the spiritual life. Okay, so either your life and we'll just say following Jesus is integrated with politics, or politics is kind of something else. So how do you view your faith and the amount of time that you're giving to all of this? How do you see that being connected, or I should say interconnected?
Ooh, wow. That's a good one. I could see this as my role in advancing the kingdom. We're all commissioned to do things in his name, And this wasn't something that, I thought was going to be, my job, doing my part. But looking back at this, it's like, because for the first, 4 or 5 years, it was just, go in, prepare Kurt, and be done with it. But now the fact that we have, that we've had somebody like John to work with us to take that next step in the discussion of, bills, amendments, just regular speeches, it's been a long game that a lot of people, want that short game thing, want to win short term and be done with it. But, it's just been one of those slow down, as much as we would like to do things on our time frame, it's not our time frame. We have to do things as they come out and as the opportunities present themselves. And all of this has just been his timing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Gary, what would you like to say to Knisely Prayer Partners? You have an audience right now. Most of them probably have never met you, don't know prior to this that you were doing things. What would you like to say to the prayer partners?
First and foremost is don't give up. This is only the beginning of what I hope is a radical swing towards liberty in Indiana. On paper, it looks like it's 2 versus 98. But there are more that are on our side than is probably known even to those who stand against Kurt and John. They just need to either take that leap of faith or a realization that there are some who do not have their best interests or their constituents at heart. And there are those like Kurt and John that do. Kurt and John go there to be representatives. Everybody else goes there to be spokesmen to the constituency. Kurt and John go there to be representatives to Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. And that's what drives them crazy. Basically those that are sitting in the caucuses now have really 2 choices. Either join us or, you'll be cleaning out your desk before organization day next year. I'm looking around, I see several people around the state that are inspired by what Kurt and John are doing. They want to run for office. They want to help. And if, you don't live in either of these districts and you are thinking about it, reach out to me. Because I can give you the direct knowledge that you could have that you can use to either, you may not win, but you'll make the politicians sweat. And we don't necessarily, if we had 100 Kurt and Johns, life would be so much easier. We don't need 100 Kurt or Johns in there. We just need a Kurt, a John, and 50 other people that will actually listen to them. It's a challenge. If you're considering running for office, it's a challenge. And Kurt and John will be the first ones to tell you that. But with the right wisdom and the right counsel, it's something that can be done, but you can't do it on a whim. You actually have to seriously think about, if you want to run, the time and effort that you're going to have to. And Kurt and John will tell you, stories of time and effort that's been put in.
Gary, we're going to wrap up, and I just want to say thank you. Mm-hmm. I hope that people watching this understand that you represent other people who have found niches in this movement. So we don't all do the same things. We shouldn't all feel like we all have to do the same things. And you have such a key role, but probably until now, a lot of people had no idea what you were doing, and you're putting a mammoth amount of time into supporting the liberty movement and John and Kurt. And we need more people like you. But we also need people just to figure out, what is it that God wants me to do? What's my part, as in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and then go do it. And that's what I see you doing. I'm just so excited that you are pursuing your 10. You are a 10 in what you're doing, and you're doing it well. And we need that. and the movement would be so different without you. So thank you so much. Thank you for all the time that you've invested to bring you to this point. And I agree with you. I think it was a tremendous session. And I see you really functioning really well at this level right now. And hopefully, Lord will give us more opportunities to keep doing this. Any final comments you want to make?
No, well, I mean, really, the thing that I can say is the session actually isn't over yet. They've adjourned for now. Normally, at this point, they would be done for the session. But because our friends in Washington haven't sent the Census Bureau data yet, we're still waiting on that. But because Kurt and John will actually have to go back in, they're hoping fall, October, November for redistricting. That's really one of the reasons why they ended earlier than they did. So it's going to be one of those things to where, yeah, Kurt and John will have time to relax, gather themselves, go back to being citizens first instead of legislate. Well, they could put on their citizen hat for a few months, but they'll have to go back and put their legislator hat back on. And 2022, I don't yet know how it's going to unfold, but I still see even more wins.
So you brought something up. Let's deal with this in just maybe 2 minutes. Give us the nutshell on how we should be praying concerning redistricting. What is the purpose of that? How does that affect the liberty movement?
Well, it really depends on how they redistrict. Instinctively, I could be wrong. They'll try to pit Kurt and or John in districts where they have to face, another legislator. So, and one of them may have to, they try to pit them against an incumbent. It's something that they normally don't try to do or want to do, especially in their own parties. But Kurt and John have given them so many stomach ulcers that they're thinking that they've got to get rid of them. And if this is the way they have to do it, then so be it. But in doing that, anyone that's around either of those districts should be extremely worried, because Kurt and John are the most passionate about what they believe. And that, the records of all those incumbents around them are known. And it's going to be this battle of, what do you want? Do you want somebody who, says one thing, does something else? Or do you want someone that says one thing, goes and does it? And in the long run, I think we're right. People want to do, people want them to say what they mean and mean what they say. And that's what Kurt and John did in their own ways, and they've done it successfully. And this has just been probably the most fun session I've ever seen.
All right. Thank you, my friend. Thanks for what you do. You are deeply appreciated.
Yep.
Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks.